The cold clink of silverware on china echoed louder than my own heartbeat that day when my son walked right past me in the grand lobby, not even sparing a glance. 30 rich families I had cooked for in New York City, countless dinners prepared with my own worn hands, and my own flesh and blood refused to say hi. It shattered something deep inside me, like a cracked porcelain plate I couldn't fix. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. I'm Gladys, 72 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life as a private cook for some of Manhattan's wealthiest families. My story begins each morning before dawn in my tiny Queens apartment, where the smell of fresh espresso mingles with the persistent dampness that seeps through the old walls. The cracked linoleum beneath my feet tells stories of decades spent rushing between stove and sink, preparing meals that would never grace my own table. The subway rumbles beneath my building like a mechanical heartbeat, carrying thousands of dreams and disappointments through the arteries of the city I've called home for 43 years. I came here from a small town in Ohio with nothing but a worn recipe book that belonged to my mother and the fierce determination to give my son Daniel the life I never had. But success, I've learned, can be the cruelest master of all. That December evening when I received the gilded invitation to the Pembroke family's annual holiday gala, the 30th family I had cooked for over the years, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: hope. My hands trembled as I held the cream-colored cardstock, embossed with gold lettering that seemed to mock my calloused fingers. Daniel's name appeared on the guest list. My son, now 38 years old, had married into this world of crystal champagne flutes and conversations about summer homes in the Hamptons. I pressed my best black dress, the one I'd worn to his college graduation 15 years ago. It still fit, though it hung differently on my frame now, looser in some places where worry had carved away at my appetite, tighter in others where age had redistributed what remained of me. I polished my only pair of good shoes until they reflected the harsh fluorescent light of my bathroom. Standing before my bathroom mirror that night, I practiced what I would say when I saw him. "Hello, Daniel. You look wonderful." Simple words that carried the weight of years of silence, months of unanswered calls, birthday cards returned to sender. The gala was held at the Plaza Hotel, that grand dame of Manhattan luxury that I had only seen in movies. Walking through those revolving doors felt like entering a different dimension, one where the air itself seemed more expensive. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on marble floors so polished I could see my reflection walking beside me, a small, gray-haired woman clutching a simple black purse among titans of industry and their jeweled wives. And then I saw him. Daniel stood near the grand staircase, impeccable in his tailored tuxedo, a crystal tumbler of what looked like aged whiskey in his manicured hand. His hair, once the unruly curls I used to smooth down before school, was now perfectly styled. He was laughing at something a silver-haired man was saying, his head thrown back in the carefree way I remembered from his childhood, when he would giggle at my silly attempts to make shadow puppets on his bedroom wall. Our eyes met across that opulent room for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds where the world held its breath. 3 seconds where I saw my baby boy's face flicker with recognition. 3 seconds before he deliberately turned away and continued his conversation as if I were nothing more than wallpaper. I stood frozen in that moment, the sounds of the party, the tinkling laughter, the gentle clink of glasses, the soft jazz trio in the corner, all fading into a hollow echo. My chest felt tight, as if someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribs and was slowly tightening them. The gilt-framed mirrors that lined the wall seemed to multiply my humiliation into infinity. That night, I went home to my small apartment and sat in my kitchen until dawn, staring at a photograph I kept tucked in my recipe box. Daniel at age 7, his face smeared with chocolate frosting from the birthday cake I had spent all day making from scratch. His arms were wrapped around my neck, and we were both laughing at something. I can't remember what now, but I remember the sound of his joy filling our tiny kitchen like sunlight. When did that little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms become this stranger who could look through me as if I were invisible? But let me start from the beginning, because this story, our story, didn't begin with that moment of rejection. It began 43 years ago, when I was 29 and foolishly believed that love was always enough. I was a young widow then, Daniel barely 2 years old, his father killed in a construction accident that left us with more medical bills than insurance money. I had grown up poor in rural Ohio, the daughter of a woman who cleaned houses and a man who drank away whatever she brought home. But I knew how to cook. Lord, did I know how to cook? My grandmother had taught me that food was love made tangible, that the right combination of spices and care could heal hearts and fill empty spaces in souls. So when my neighbor in Cleveland told me about opportunities for domestic workers in New York City, I packed our few belongings into 2 suitcases and took a Greyhound bus east, Daniel sleeping fitfully in my lap as we rolled through the night toward what I prayed would be a better future. Our first apartment in Queens was a fourth-floor walk-up so small that when Daniel stretched his arms wide, he could almost touch both walls of his bedroom. The radiator clanked like a ghost rattling chains, and in winter, I had to tape plastic over the windows to keep the cold from seeping through the gaps around the frames. But it was ours, and after the first few weeks of eating nothing but rice and beans while I looked for work, I found my calling. Mrs. Rothschild, not the famous banking Rothschilds, mind you, but wealthy enough to live in a Park Avenue penthouse, hired me as her live-out cook after tasting the apple pie I brought to her employment interview. She was a stern woman with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, but she appreciated good food and paid fairly. More importantly, she didn't mind that I sometimes had to bring Daniel with me during school holidays. Children should understand the value of honest work, she would say, watching Daniel color quietly at her kitchen table while I prepared elaborate dinner parties for 12. Those early years were hard but hopeful. I would wake at 4 in the morning to prepare Daniel's breakfast, walk him to school, take 3 subway trains to reach Mrs. Rothschild's kitchen, work until late afternoon preparing meals and cleaning up, then reverse the journey to pick up Daniel from the after-school program I could barely afford. By the time I tucked him into bed each night, my feet ached so badly I sometimes cried into my pillow. But Daniel was fed, clothed, warm, and safe. That was all that mattered. Word spread through Manhattan's wealthy circles about the cook from Queens who could transform simple ingredients into magic. Mrs. Rothschild recommended me to her sister, who recommended me to her bridge partner, who recommended me to her country club friends. Within 5 years, I was cooking for some of the most prestigious families in the city. I learned their preferences by heart. The Weatherbys liked their lamb cooked precisely medium rare and seasoned with rosemary from their herb garden. Mrs. Chin Morrison insisted on fresh pasta made from scratch every Tuesday, cut exactly 1/4 inch wide. The Pemberton family required gluten-free everything for their youngest daughter, which meant I had to master an entirely new way of baking. Each family had their quirks, their unspoken rules, their little kingdoms where I moved like a ghost who could transform raw ingredients into culinary poetry but was never quite seen as fully human. I was Gladys the cook, reliable and skilled, but not Gladys the woman with dreams and fears and a heart that sometimes ached with loneliness. But I endured it all because of Daniel. Every dollar I earned went toward his future. I bought him new clothes while wearing dresses from thrift stores. I paid for violin lessons even though the music made my head pound after 14-hour workdays. When he wanted to join the soccer team, I found a way to afford the equipment and tournament fees, even if it meant skipping meals for a week. "Mom, why do you work so much?" he asked me one evening when he was 12. He was sitting at our small kitchen table, struggling with algebra homework while I prepared tomorrow's grocery list for the Morrison family's dinner party. "So you can have opportunities one never had, baby," I told him, reaching over to smooth that stubborn cowlick that never wanted to lie flat. "Someday, you'll understand." He pulled away from my touch then, something I noticed but chose to ignore. 12-year-old boys don't want their mothers fussing over them, I told myself. It was normal. Natural. He was growing up. But the pulling away never stopped. It only got worse. During his teenage years, our conversations became shorter, more functional. "How was school?" "Fine. Do you have homework?" "Already did it." "Are you hungry?" "I ate already." I told myself this was typical adolescent behavior. All the parenting magazines I read during stolen moments on subway rides assured me that teenagers naturally separate from their parents as they develop their own identities. I clung to that explanation like a life preserver in stormy seas. But deep down, in the quiet moments before sleep, I wondered if Daniel was ashamed of me. Ashamed of our small apartment, of my work uniforms that smelled like other people's kitchens, of the way I spoke without the polished accent of the families I served. When his friends came over, the few times he allowed it, they looked around our cramped space with poorly concealed pity or curiosity, like anthropologists studying some exotic specimen. "Your mom makes really good cookies," one of them said once, reaching for his third chocolate chip cookie from the batch I'd baked that morning. "She's okay," Daniel mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "Okay." After 17 hours of work that day, after hand-mixing that cookie dough because our ancient mixer had finally given up its ghost, after carefully timing the baking so they'd be warm when he brought his friends home from school, I was okay. The word stung more than any slap could have. High school graduation was a bittersweet triumph. Daniel had earned a full scholarship to Columbia University, an achievement I celebrated by crying in the subway bathroom on my way to work the next morning. My baby was going to college. My baby was going to have the education, the opportunities, the life I had dreamed of giving him. The scholarship covered tuition, but living expenses in Manhattan were astronomical. I took on additional clients, sometimes working for 3 different families in a single day, racing between Park Avenue penthouses and Upper East Side townhouses with bags of ingredients and equipment. My knees began to ache constantly from standing on marble floors for hours at a time. My hands became permanently stained from constant chopping, mixing, kneading. But Daniel was at Columbia. He was studying business and economics. He was exactly where I had always pictured him. The calls home became less frequent during his freshman year. "Just busy with studies, Mom," he would say during our brief conversations. "You understand." I did understand. I understood so well that I began making excuses for him to myself. College was demanding. He was making new friends, learning to navigate a world I had only glimpsed from kitchen doorways. It was healthy for him to build his independence. When he brought girlfriends home during breaks, they were polite but distant. Lauren, a blonde girl from Connecticut whose father owned a chain of restaurants, smiled tightly when I offered to cook her favorite meal. "Oh, that's so sweet, Mrs. What do I call you again?" "Just Gladys is fine, dear." "Right. Gladys. Actually, I'm trying to eat less carbs, but thank you." She and Daniel would disappear to his room or out to restaurants I couldn't afford, leaving me alone with my questions and fears. Was I not sophisticated enough for his new life? Did my presence embarrass him in front of people whose mothers played tennis at country clubs and chaired charity committees? During his senior year at Columbia, Daniel began dating Sophia Pembroke. The Pembrokes, yes, the same family whose holiday gala would later become the scene of my public humiliation, were Manhattan royalty. Old money, Fifth Avenue address, social connections that traced back to the founding of the city itself. Sophia was beautiful in that effortless way of women born to privilege, sun-kissed hair that always looked perfectly tousled, clothes that cost more than I made in a month but looked casually thrown together. Her family's in finance, Daniel told me, and there was something different in his voice when he spoke about her. A pride I hadn't heard before, mixed with an anxiety that made him straighten his back and choose his words more carefully. I met her exactly 3 times during the course of their relationship. 3 polite, stilted encounters where she smiled with her mouth but not her eyes and made conversation about the weather while clearly wishing she were anywhere else. After graduation, Daniel landed a position at an investment firm downtown. Good money, excellent benefits, a foot in the door of the financial world where fortunes were made and lost with the click of a computer mouse. I was proud, so proud I wanted to shout it from the rooftop of my Queens building. My son, the first person in our family to graduate college, was working on Wall Street. But success brought distance. The calls became even less frequent. Our monthly dinners, a tradition I had tried to maintain, were cancelled with increasing regularity. Client meeting ran late, Mom. Have to work this weekend. Rain check. Rain checks that never came. His apartment in Lower Manhattan might as well have been on another planet. He invited me over exactly twice in 5 years, both times when he needed help with something, once to cook for a dinner party he was hosting for work colleagues, once to help him recover from food poisoning when Sophia was out of town. I remember that second visit so clearly it still takes my breath away. Daniel was pale and weak, curled up on his expensive leather sofa in wrinkled pajamas that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. For a few hours, he was my little boy again, letting me make him soup and ginger tea, accepting my gentle ministrations without embarrassment or impatience. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered as I tucked a blanket around his shoulders. "I forgot how good you are at taking care of people." My heart soared. This was it, the moment when we would reconnect, when he would remember that underneath all his success and sophistication, he was still my Daniel and I was still his mother who loved him more than life itself. But as soon as he felt better, the walls went back up. The grateful, vulnerable young man disappeared, replaced by the polished professional who answered my calls with distracted efficiency and remembered my birthday only when prompted by calendar reminders on his phone. The engagement announcement came through a formal card in the mail. Engraved stationery announcing that Mr. Daniel Marcus Thompson and Miss Sophia Elizabeth Pembroke would be united in marriage on the 3rd Saturday in June at the Pembroke family estate in the Hamptons. No phone call. No personal note. Just my name and address written in calligraphy I knew wasn't Daniel's handwriting. I called him that evening, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Oh, right, the announcement," he said when I congratulated him. "Yeah, Sophia's mother handles all that formal stuff. You know how those families are. Those families." As if he weren't about to become part of one. "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart," I managed to say through the tightness in my throat. "Sophia seems lovely." "She is. Listen, Mom, I need to run. We're having dinner with her parents tonight." "Of course. I love you, Daniel." A pause. Yeah, talk to you later. He hung up before I could say goodbye. The wedding was everything you would expect from a family like the Pembrokes. 200 guests on manicured lawns overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Flowers flown in from Holland. A 10-piece orchestra. A cake so elaborate it looked like architectural sculpture. I wore the nicest dress I could afford, navy blue with a modest neckline and sleeves that covered my work-worn arms. I had splurged on new shoes that pinched my feet and a small hat because Sophia's mother had mentioned in passing that proper ladies always wear hats to outdoor weddings. The ceremony was beautiful. Daniel looked handsome and confident as he waited at the altar, surrounded by groomsmen who had probably never worried about rent money in their lives. Sophia floated down the aisle in a dress that cost more than I made in 6 months, radiant with the kind of happiness that comes from knowing the world will always arrange itself to your satisfaction. I cried during the ceremony, but not from joy. I cried because my son's eyes found everyone in that crowd except me. I cried because when the minister asked who was giving this woman away, Sophia's father stood with pride, but when it came time for the mothers to light the unity candle, I had to wait for a wedding coordinator to discreetly point me toward the altar because no one had told me when it was my turn. I cried because at the reception, I sat at a table with distant Pembroke relatives who made polite conversation about the weather and the lovely flowers while treating me like an interesting artifact from Daniel's past rather than his mother. So you're Daniel's mother, one woman said, her eyes taking in my discount store dress and drugstore jewelry. How nice that you could make it. As if attending my own son's wedding was some kind of special favor rather than the most important day of my life. When Daniel and Sophia danced their first dance to some song I didn't recognize, played by musicians who cost more than most people's cars, I excused myself to the ladies' room and sobbed in a marble bathroom that was larger than my entire kitchen. A woman found me there, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, I later learned, an elderly artist who had been a friend of Sophia's grandmother. She was probably in her 80s then, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and the kindest eyes I had ever seen. "My dear, are you all right?" she asked, offering me a handkerchief made of real linen. "I'm fine," I lied, dabbing at my eyes. "Just emotional. Weddings, you know." She studied my face for a moment. "You're Daniel's mother." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I've been watching you today," she said gently. "You look like a woman who has loved deeply and sacrificed greatly." Those words broke something open in me. I found myself telling this stranger about the years of working multiple jobs, the missed meals so Daniel could have music lessons, the pride I felt watching him succeed mixed with the growing distance that success had created between us. "Love isn't always returned in the way we hope," she said finally. "But that doesn't make it worthless. The love you gave shaped him into the man he became, even if he can't see that now." I treasured those words in the months that followed, clinging to them during the longer and longer silences from Daniel and Sophia. They honeymooned in Italy for 3 weeks. I found out from a Facebook post Sophia made, featuring a photo of them looking sun-kissed and blissful against the backdrop of the Tuscan countryside. When they returned, I called to welcome them home and ask how the trip was. "It was good, Mom. Listen, we're still dealing with jet lag, so maybe we can catch up later." Later stretched into weeks, then months. They bought a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. I knew because Mrs. Hartwell, Eleanor, she insisted I call her, mentioned it during one of our occasional phone conversations. She had taken to checking on me after the wedding, a kindness I hadn't expected but desperately needed. "It's a beautiful place," she told me. "Sophia showed me photos at the museum gala last week. Very modern, lots of windows." I tried to picture my son in such a place, tried to imagine him standing at floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the green expanse of the park where I used to take him to feed the ducks when he was small. Did he ever think of those simple Sundays when we would ride the subway into Manhattan with day-old breadcrumbs in a paper bag, when the whole afternoon stretched ahead of us with nothing more expensive planned than a walk around the reservoir? "I'm sure it's lovely," I said. "Have you seen it yet?" Eleanor asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. How could I explain that my son lived 20 minutes away by subway but might as well have been on Mars? That I knew more about his home from a woman I had met once than from him directly? "Not yet," I managed. "They're so busy getting settled." Eleanor's silence on the other end of the line told me she understood exactly what that meant. The years that followed blurred together in a rhythm of work and waiting. I continued cooking for Manhattan's elite, my skills honed by decades of practice until I could prepare a dinner for 20 with my eyes closed. The Morrison family recommended me to the Ashfords. The Ashfords introduced me to the Vandenbergs. My reputation grew quietly but steadily, passed along through networks of privilege I could never fully access but upon which I had somehow become indispensable. Daniel's career flourished too, though I learned about his promotions and achievements through fragments, a mention in the financial section of the Times, updates from Eleanor who moved in circles where such things were discussed. He was becoming exactly what I had always hoped, but we were becoming strangers in the process. The phone calls dwindled to birthday wishes and obligatory holiday check-ins. Christmas became particularly painful, elaborate cards signed Daniel and Sophia, with no personal note, expensive gift baskets from stores I had never heard of, all designed to fulfill obligation without requiring any actual thought or emotion. "How are you, Mom?" became the standard opening to our conversations, but he never waited long enough for a real answer. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Working a lot, keeping busy. How are you and Sophia?" "Good, we're good. Busy. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. I didn't know if Sophia still disliked carbs or if she had learned to cook anything besides reservations. I didn't know if Daniel was happy in his work or just successful at it. I didn't know if they wanted children, if they traveled, if they had friends they laughed with the way Daniel used to laugh with me over silly movies on Sunday afternoons. I didn't know my own son anymore. The loneliness was like a physical ache, settled deep in my chest where it pulsed with every heartbeat. There were nights when I would lie awake in my small bedroom, listening to the sounds of the city, sirens and car horns and the distant rumble of trains, and wonder if this was what I had worked so hard for. Was this the life I had envisioned when I carried that sleeping 2-year-old on the bus from Ohio? Had I somehow loved my son right out of my life? I started going to a small Catholic church near my building, not because I was particularly religious but because Father Martinez had kind eyes and because sitting in those wooden pews during evening mass gave me an hour where the emptiness felt less sharp. There were other older women there, mostly widows and empty nesters, and though we rarely spoke beyond polite greetings, there was comfort in sharing space with people who understood what silence could mean. "You look tired, Mija," Father Martinez said to me one evening after Mass, using the Spanish endearment that always made my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Just working a lot, Father." "Christ calls us to rest sometimes too," he said gently. "Even from love. Especially from love that costs too much." I didn't understand what he meant then. I thought love was supposed to cost everything, that motherhood was about endless giving regardless of what came back. It took me years to realize that love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's martyrdom disguised as virtue. But I kept giving anyway. When Daniel called one December afternoon 4 years into his marriage, only the third time he had initiated contact that year, my heart leaped with hope that maybe, finally, things would change. "Hey, Mom. How are you doing?" "I'm wonderful, honey. So good to hear from you. How are you and Sophia?" "We're fine. Listen, I'm calling because we need a favor." "A favor." Not "I missed you," or "I was thinking about you," or "I wanted to hear your voice." "A favor." "Of course, sweetheart. What do you need?" "Sophia's company is hosting this big charity gala thing, and they need someone to cater it. High-end stuff, you know? The usual caterer fell through at the last minute, and I remembered how good you were at those fancy dinner parties back in the day. Back in the day. As if my cooking career were some quaint hobby from the distant past rather than my daily reality. "The pay would be really good," he continued. "Like, really good. Enough to maybe fix up your apartment or take a vacation or something." The money wasn't why my hands started shaking. It was the casual way he assumed I would drop everything to solve his problem, the way he reduced our relationship to a business transaction. But underneath the hurt was that familiar, treacherous hope. Maybe this was his way of including me in his life again. Maybe working together would remind him of all the meals I had prepared for his school friends, all the birthday cakes I had baked from scratch, all the ways food had been my language of love. "I would love to help," I said. "Great. I'll have Sophia call you with the details." Sophia never called. Instead, I received an email from her assistant with a detailed list of requirements: cocktail hour for 200, seated dinner for 150, specific dietary restrictions for various VIPs, a menu that read like a United Nations summit of international cuisine. The timeline was impossibly tight, 16-hour days for 3 weeks to pull off an event that usually required months of planning. I said yes anyway. Those 3 weeks nearly killed me. I shopped at specialty markets across 4 boroughs, hunting down ingredients you couldn't find at ordinary grocery stores. I tested recipes until my small kitchen looked like a war zone. I hired 2 assistants, young culinary school graduates who worked for almost nothing, and turned them into an efficient prep team. The day of the gala, I arrived at the venue at 5 in the morning and worked straight through until midnight, orchestrating service for 5 different courses while managing a staff of 40 servers and bartenders. My feet screamed inside my professional shoes. My lower back seized up from hours of bending over warming trays. But the food was perfect, every dish executed flawlessly, presented beautifully, praised by guests who had no idea that the woman directing the kitchen had raised the host from poverty. Daniel appeared in the kitchen exactly once, around 9 o'clock when the main course was being served. "Everything looks great, Mom," he said, surveying the organized chaos of service with what might have been pride. "Really professional." For a moment, we stood side by side in the hot kitchen, surrounded by the sounds of clinking plates and urgent whispers, and I allowed myself to imagine this was a partnership. My son and I, working together, each contributing our skills to create something memorable. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," I said softly. He nodded, already turning to leave. "Yeah, thanks for doing this. Sophia's really relieved it worked out." And he was gone, back to his world of networking and champagne toasts, leaving me with the dirty dishes and exhausted staff. The payment arrived 2 weeks later, a check that was indeed generous, delivered by courier with a note that read simply, "Thank you. D&S Thompson Pembroke." Thompson Pembroke. Even his name had changed. I deposited the check and used the money to replace my ancient refrigerator and fix the bathroom leak that had been dripping for 6 months. Practical improvements to a practical life. But what I really wanted to buy was impossible to purchase: my son's remembrance that I was more than hired help, that I was the woman who had sung him to sleep and bandaged his scraped knees and cheered from the stands at every soccer game. The months after the gala settled back into the familiar pattern of silence. No follow-up call to ask how I was or to thank me personally. No text messages sharing funny moments from the event. Nothing to suggest that those 16-hour days had meant anything more than a business transaction successfully completed. I kept cooking for other families, perfecting my craft while my own family recipe book gathered dust. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could create elaborate meals that brought wealthy families together around tables that cost more than my annual rent, but I couldn't seem to cook up a way back into my own son's heart. Mrs. Weatherby, one of my longtime clients, noticed my increasing weariness during those months. "Gladys, dear, you look tired," she said one afternoon as I prepared her weekly bridge club luncheon. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just getting older, Mrs. Weatherby," I replied, focusing on arranging delicate finger sandwiches on her good china. "We're all getting older," she said, settling into a chair at her kitchen island where she liked to watch me work. "But some of us are carrying heavier loads than others." Mrs. Weatherby was in her 70s, a widow who had raised 4 children as a single mother after her husband died young. She understood something about sacrifice, about the particular exhaustion that comes from loving people who don't always love you back in equal measure. "Do you mind if I ask about your family, dear? You never speak of them." The question caught me off guard. In 15 years of working for the Weatherbys, she had never asked about my personal life. The unspoken rule in most of these households was that domestic staff remained politely invisible beyond their professional functions. "I have a son," I said carefully. "He's doing very well." "That's wonderful," she said, then waited in the way people do when they sense there's more to the story. "He's married now. Lives in the city. Very successful businessman. And you're proud of him." "Very proud." "But you miss him." Those 4 words broke something open inside me. I had to turn away and focus very intently on cutting crusts off white bread to keep from crying in Mrs. Weatherby's kitchen. "It's natural for children to build their own lives," I said finally. "Yes, it is. But it's also natural for children to remember where they came from. The two aren't mutually exclusive." I felt her studying me as I worked, her eyes taking in the slump of my shoulders, the careful way I was controlling my breathing. "Gladys, may I tell you something my mother told me when my own children were pulling away from me?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "She said that sometimes the people we love most are the ones we take most for granted. Not because they love us less, but because they trust our love so completely they assume it will always be there, no matter how they treat it." "But what if they're wrong?" I whispered. "Then it's up to us to show them that love has limits too. That respect and kindness aren't optional just because someone gave birth to you." That conversation stayed with me through the long subway ride home, through the preparation of my own simple dinner, through the evening hours when I sat in my small living room trying to read but finding myself staring instead at the framed photographs that documented Daniel's journey from chubby-cheeked toddler to cap-and-gowned graduate. Mrs. Weatherby's words echoed in my head: "Love has limits too." But did it? Could it? And if so, what would that mean for a relationship that had already been reduced to such fragile threads? That night, I called Daniel. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, honey, it's Mom. Just wanted to hear your voice. Call me back when you get a chance." He never did. 2 weeks later, I tried again. This time he answered, but I could hear restaurant noise in the background, the clink of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the easy laughter of people enjoying themselves. Hey, Mom, what's up? Kind of bad timing, we're at dinner. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I just wanted to. Can I call you back later? Of course, sweetheart. Enjoy your dinner. Yeah, thanks. Talk to you soon. The line went dead. He didn't call back. I don't know why that particular broken promise hurt so much more than all the others. Maybe it was the casual way he said, talk to you soon, as if words meant nothing. Maybe it was knowing that he was sitting across from Sophia in some expensive restaurant, sharing intimate conversation and easy laughter while treating my call like an inconvenience. Maybe it was the growing realization that I had become the person he would get back to, but never quite found time for. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took the subway into Manhattan not for work, but just to walk. I found myself in Central Park, on the same paths where I used to push Daniel's stroller 25 years earlier. The trees were bare, their skeletal branches reaching toward a gray December sky, but the park was still beautiful in that harsh, honest way that winter brings to everything. I sat on a bench near the reservoir and watched the joggers and dog walkers go by, all of them bundled against the cold but moving with purpose through their Sunday afternoon lives. A young mother pushed a stroller past me, cooing at the baby inside while an older child ran ahead, calling back excitedly about the ducks he had spotted near the water. Mama, look at all the ducks. I see them, sweetheart. Aren't they beautiful? Such a simple exchange, but it made my chest ache with memories. Daniel had been that excited little boy once, tugging on my hand and pointing at everything worth seeing in the world. When had we stopped looking at things together? When had his wonder at the world stopped including me as a witness? I sat on that bench as the afternoon light faded and families gathered their children and headed home to warm dinners and Sunday evening routines. The park grew quieter, more peaceful, but also somehow more lonely. My phone buzzed with a text message. For one hopeful moment, I thought it might be Daniel, finally calling me back as promised. Instead, it was Eleanor Hartwell, checking in as she had taken to doing since the wedding. Hello dear. Thinking of you today. Would you like to join me for tea this week? I wrote back, that would be lovely. Thank you. Eleanor lived in a beautiful pre-war apartment building on the Upper West Side, the kind of place with doormen and marble lobbies and brass mailboxes that gleamed from daily polishing. Her apartment was filled with art, paintings and sculptures she had collected over decades of traveling, photographs from her younger years when she had been a successful painter herself. You look thin, she said as she served tea from delicate porcelain cups that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I've been working a lot. And eating? I shrugged. The truth was, I had been skipping meals without really noticing. Food held less appeal when you spent all day preparing it for other people's enjoyment. Gladys, may I ask you something? I nodded. When was the last time you did something just for yourself? Not for work, not for family, not out of obligation. Just because it brought you joy. The question stumped me completely. I sat there holding my teacup, trying to remember a single instance in recent memory when I had chosen my own happiness over someone else's needs. I can't remember, I admitted. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, studying me over the rim of her own cup. I'm going to tell you something that took me 70 years to learn, she said. You cannot love someone into loving you back. You cannot sacrifice yourself into someone else's gratitude. And you cannot earn affection by making yourself smaller and smaller until there's nothing left of you but the service you provide. Her words hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath. But he's my son, I whispered. Yes, he is. And you raised him to be independent and successful. Mission accomplished. But that doesn't mean you disappear in the process. I don't know how to stop. Start small, she said gently. Start with one thing you want that has nothing to do with anyone else's needs or approval. I thought about it all the way home on the subway, staring at my reflection in the dark windows as we rattled through tunnels beneath the city. One thing I wanted. One thing that was just for me. When was the last time I had wanted anything that wasn't related to Daniel's happiness or my client's satisfaction? That night, I made a list. Not a grocery list or a work schedule, but a list of things I used to enjoy before my life became entirely about other people's needs. I used to love reading, especially mystery novels that kept me guessing until the last page. I used to enjoy long baths with expensive soap that made my small bathroom smell like a garden. I used to paint watercolors on Sunday afternoons, nothing fancy or skilled, just the simple pleasure of watching colors blend on paper. I used to sing while I cooked, not for anyone else's entertainment, just because music made the work feel lighter. When had I stopped doing all of these things? When had maintenance and obligation crowded out every trace of joy? The next week, I bought myself a mystery novel and a bar of lavender soap that cost more than I usually spent on myself in a month. Small rebellions, but they felt enormous. The month that followed brought its own small revelations. I began to notice how automatically I put everyone else first, how reflexively I swallowed my own needs in favor of convenience for others. Mrs. Morrison called on my day off to ask if I could cover for another cook who had called in sick, and for the first time in 20 years, I said no. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison, but I have plans today." The plans were to read my mystery novel and take a long bath, but they were my plans, chosen by me for my own pleasure. "Oh," she said, clearly surprised. "Well, I suppose I'll have to find someone else." "I'm sure you will," I replied, and hung up before I could apologize or offer to rearrange my schedule. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. But the real test came in February, when Daniel called with news that should have filled me with joy. "Mom? I have something to tell you." His voice sounded different, excited in a way I hadn't heard since he was young. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Sophia's pregnant. We're going to have a baby. A grandmother." I was going to be a grandmother. The words should have sent me spinning with happiness, should have had me planning knitting projects and nursery decorating sessions and all the ways I would spoil this child the way grandmothers are supposed to. Instead, I felt a strange mixture of joy and dread. "Oh, Daniel, that's wonderful news," I managed. "Congratulations to both of you." "Thanks, Mom. We're really excited. It's still early, but everything looks good." "When are you due?" "September sometime. Sophia's been feeling pretty sick, so we're taking it easy for now." There was a pause, and I found myself waiting for him to say something about how much this baby would mean to have a grandmother who could cook homemade baby food and tell bedtime stories and provide all the loving attention Daniel had taken for granted as a child. Instead, he said, "Listen, I should probably go. Sophia's trying to rest." "Of course. Give her my love." "Will do. Talk to you later, Mom." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. A baby. My grandchild. Daniel's child. And once again, I felt like I was receiving news about my own family from a distance, as if I were a neighbor or acquaintance rather than the person who would love this child more than life itself. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe I had spent so many years loving more than life itself that I had forgotten to actually live. Over the following weeks, I found myself thinking constantly about what kind of grandmother I wanted to be. Not what kind Daniel and Sophia would allow me to be, but what kind I actually wanted to be. Did I want to be the grandmother who came when called to provide free babysitting but was dismissible when inconvenient? Did I want to be the one who showered the child with gifts and attention while being treated as secondary to the real family? Or did I want to be the kind of grandmother who commanded respect, who was valued for more than just the services she provided, who had a life and interests and dignity of her own to offer as an example? The choice seemed obvious when framed that way. But making it real would require changes I wasn't sure I was brave enough to make. Spring came early that year, and with it, Eleanor's suggestion that we start taking weekly walks in Central Park. "Exercise is important," she said, "but so is getting out of our own heads sometimes." Those walks became a lifeline. Eleanor was a wonderful listener, but she was also skilled at asking the uncomfortable questions that forced me to examine my own assumptions. "Have you thought about what boundaries you want to establish with this grandchild?" she asked one April afternoon as we paused to watch a family of mallards paddle across the pond. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what are the terms under which you're willing to be involved? Are you available for emergency childcare at any hour? Will you provide free babysitting whenever they want date nights? Are your holidays automatically subordinated to whatever plans they make?" I had never thought about grandmotherhood as something that required boundaries. In my mind, it was like motherhood: you gave whatever was needed, whenever it was needed, however it was needed. "I want to be helpful," I said. "Helpful is good. But helpful and exploited aren't the same thing." That evening, I made another list. This one was titled, "What I Want from Being a Grandmother," and it was much harder to write than the list of things I enjoyed. I wanted to know my grandchild as a person, not just care for them as a responsibility. I wanted my relationship with them to be valued, not taken for granted. I wanted to share my knowledge and experience, but also learn from their fresh perspective on the world. I wanted to be included in major decisions about their upbringing, at least to the extent of being informed rather than surprised. I wanted my time and energy to be respected, not assumed. I wanted my son to remember that becoming a father didn't erase the fact that he was still my child, too. Reading over that list, I realized how far my relationship with Daniel had drifted from any of those hopes. When was the last time he had asked for my advice rather than my help? When was the last time he had shared good news with me because he wanted to celebrate rather than because social obligation demanded it? When was the last time he had treated me like a person whose feelings mattered rather than a resource to be managed? The baby shower invitation arrived in June, delivered by the same courier service Daniel and Sophia used for all their formal correspondence. Thick cardstock, elegant calligraphy, a guest list that read like a who's who of Manhattan society. My name was listed without a +1, of course. Not Mrs. Gladys Thompson and guest, just Mrs. Gladys Thompson, relegated to what I suspected would be a table of distant relatives and family friends who didn't quite fit into the main social circles. But I was invited. That had to mean something. I spent more money than I could afford on an outfit for the shower, a dress that made me feel elegant for the first time in years and low-heeled shoes that were comfortable enough for a long social event. I bought a gift from the registry, a high-end stroller that cost more than my monthly rent but was exactly what Sophia had specified she wanted. The shower was held at the Pembroke family's Hamptons estate, the same location where Daniel and Sophia had been married. Seeing those manicured lawns and perfect flower beds again brought back all the complicated emotions of that wedding day, pride in Daniel's success mixed with sorrow at my own exclusion from it. I arrived precisely on time, which turned out to be a mistake. Apparently, fashionable lateness was expected at events like these, and I found myself among the first guests to walk through the elaborately decorated doors. The awkwardness of not knowing anyone and not being quite sure where to put myself in the social hierarchy was familiar by now, but no less uncomfortable. Sophia looked radiant in the way pregnant women sometimes do when everything else in their life is going exactly according to plan. She floated from group to group in a flowing dress that somehow made her growing belly look elegant rather than cumbersome, accepting congratulations and admiring coups with practiced grace. When she reached me, her smile was polite but distant. "Gladys, so good of you to come. How are you?" "Very well, thank you. You look beautiful, dear. How are you feeling?" "Oh, tired, you know how it is. But excited." She glanced around as if looking for someone more important to speak with, then seemed to remember her hostess duties. "The gift table is over there if you'd like to add yours to the collection." And she was gone, swept away by a group of women whose animated chatter suggested they were much closer friends than I would ever be. I found my assigned seat at a table with several older women I didn't recognize, most of whom seemed to know each other from various charity committees and social clubs. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone, stories about mutual acquaintances, gossip about people I had never heard of, plans for upcoming events I would never attend. "And how do you know Sophia?" one woman asked me during a lull in the conversation. "I'm Daniel's mother," I replied. "Oh, how wonderful. Daniel's such a lovely young man. So accomplished." "Yes, he is. And you must be so excited about becoming a grandmother." "Very excited." But even as I said it, I wondered if excited was the right word. Hopeful, maybe. Apprehensive. Determined to do better this time, though I wasn't sure what that would look like yet. During the gift opening ceremony, I watched Sophia unwrap present after present, designer baby clothes, silver rattles, hand-carved wooden toys that looked more like art pieces than playthings. Everything was beautiful, expensive, perfect. When she reached my gift, she held up the stroller with appropriate enthusiasm. "Oh, this is lovely. Thank you so much, Mrs." She paused, clearly having forgotten my name despite the fact that we were technically family. "Thompson," I supplied quietly. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. This will be so useful." "Useful? Like me? Like everything I provided." But then something unexpected happened. As Sophia continued opening gifts, I noticed Daniel standing at the back of the room, watching the proceedings with what looked like exhaustion. For just a moment, his polished facade slipped, and I saw something that reminded me of the little boy who used to get overwhelmed at his own birthday parties when too many people wanted his attention at once. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and for just a second, he looked like he wanted to escape. Like he might welcome a familiar face and unconditional love in the middle of all this orchestrated celebration. The moment passed quickly, someone called his name, someone else wanted to shake his hand and congratulate him, but it left me with a sliver of hope. Maybe underneath all the success and sophistication, Daniel was still in there somewhere. Maybe he missed me too, but didn't know how to bridge the gap that had grown between us. Maybe it wasn't too late. After the shower, I lingered on the estate grounds, not quite ready to begin the long journey back to Queens. The gardens were spectacular in the late afternoon light, roses and peonies blooming in perfectly orchestrated beds that probably required a team of gardeners to maintain. I was admiring a particularly beautiful climbing rose when I heard Daniel's voice behind me. "Mom?" I turned to find him approaching alone, having apparently slipped away from the remaining guests. "Hi, sweetheart. Beautiful party." Sophia looked so happy. "Yeah, it was nice." He paused, hands in his pockets, looking suddenly younger. "Thanks for the stroller. That was really thoughtful." You're welcome. I just want to help however I can. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us like humidity. Mom, He started to say something, then stopped. I should probably get back inside. Of course. But he didn't move immediately. Instead, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, regret, maybe, or frustration, or something deeper that he didn't have words for. We should have dinner soon, he said finally. The three of us. Before the baby comes. My heart leaped. A dinner invitation. A chance to spend real time together, to maybe begin rebuilding what we had lost. I would love that, I said. Great. I'll have Sophia call you to set it up. 3 weeks later, I was still waiting for that call. I told myself they were busy with baby preparations and work obligations. I made excuses for them to myself, even as the silence stretched longer and longer. Finally, I called Daniel myself. Oh, right, dinner, he said when I mentioned it. Yeah, things have been crazy at work. And Sophia's been having some complications, nothing serious, but the doctor wants her to take it easy. Maybe after the baby comes? After the baby comes. Always after something, always when life was less complicated, when the timing was better, when the stars aligned in ways that apparently never quite worked in my favor. Of course, I said. Family comes first. But as I hung up the phone, I wondered when I had stopped being considered family. Summer passed in a blur of work and preparation. I found myself buying baby clothes I might never see the child wear and knitting blankets that might never leave my apartment. But the activity felt important anyway, like I was weaving love into something tangible even if its destination remained uncertain. Eleanor noticed my increasing anxiety as September approached. You're worried about being shut out, she observed during one of our walks. They're busy people, I replied automatically. New parents, demanding careers. Gladys. She stopped walking and turned to face me. Stop making excuses for people who don't make time for you. But if I don't make excuses, then I have to face the possibility that I couldn't finish the sentence. That they simply don't prioritize you the way you prioritize them? The words hung in the air like a challenge. Maybe it's time to stop prioritizing people who treat you as optional, Eleanor said gently. That night, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and overdue. I wrote a letter to Daniel, not an email or a text message, but an actual handwritten letter on good stationery I bought specifically for the purpose. Dear Daniel, I began, and then sat staring at the blank page for 20 minutes before I found the courage to continue. I want to begin by saying how proud I am of the man you've become and how excited I am to meet my grandchild. You have achieved everything I dreamed of for you when you were small, and more. I paused, wondering if I should stop there, let it be just another supportive maternal message that asked nothing in return. But Eleanor's voice echoed in my head, stop making excuses for people who don't make time for you. I also want you to know that I love you enough to tell you something that might be difficult to hear. Over the past several years, I have felt increasingly invisible in your life. Phone calls go unreturned, promises are forgotten, and I often feel like I'm receiving news about my own family from strangers rather than from you. My hands shook as I wrote the words, but I forced myself to continue. I understand that you are busy and that your life is full of important responsibilities. But I am your mother, and I deserve better than to be treated as an afterthought. I deserve to be included, consulted, valued for more than just the services I can provide. I set down my pen and walked around my small apartment, gathering courage for what came next. I am writing this now because I want to be clear about my expectations as your child's grandmother. I want to be involved in their life in meaningful ways, not just as emergency childcare, but as a person who has wisdom and love to offer. I want my relationship with them to be built on mutual respect, not just obligation. The hardest part came last. If you cannot or will not make space for that kind of relationship, please tell me now so I can adjust my expectations accordingly. I would rather know where I stand than continue to hope for changes that will never come. I signed it simply Love, Mom, and sealed it in an envelope before I could lose my nerve. Daniel's response came 2 weeks later, by email rather than letter. Mom, I got your note. I think you're being a little dramatic, but I understand you want to be involved with the baby. Of course you'll be the grandmother. We can work something out after things settle down. Work something out. As if my relationship with my grandchild were a scheduling problem to be solved rather than a bond to be nurtured. But before I could respond to his email, Eleanor called with news that changed everything. Gladys, dear, I just heard through the grapevine that Sophia had the baby. A little girl. Apparently, she came early, last night. My grandchild. My granddaughter. Born last night. And I had found out from Eleanor rather than from my own son. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring. Surely Daniel would call soon with the news, with details about his daughter's health and weight and how Sophia was recovering. Surely becoming a father would remind him that families share important moments, that grandmothers don't learn about the birth of their grandchildren through third-party gossip. Hours passed. Then a day. Then another day. On the third day, I called him. "Congratulations," I said when he answered. "Eleanor Hartwell told me you had a daughter." A pause. "Oh. Right. Yeah, Isabella was born Tuesday night. She's perfect. Sophia's doing great." Isabella. My granddaughter's name was Isabella. "I wish I had heard it from you," I said quietly. "Sorry, Mom. It's been crazy here. We've been getting used to everything." "Of course. Can I come meet her?" "Well, the thing is, Sophia's parents are in town, and her sister flew in from California, so things are pretty hectic right now. Maybe in a few weeks when everyone goes home." "In a few weeks. After the grandparents who mattered had their time. After the family relationships deemed important had been properly celebrated." "I understand," I said, because I did understand. I understood exactly where I ranked in their priorities. But understanding and accepting are two different things. That night, I called Eleanor and told her everything. "I'm tired," I said. "I'm tired of begging for scraps of affection from my own family. I'm tired of being grateful for whatever crumbs of attention they throw my way. I'm tired of pretending this is normal." "What do you want to do?" Eleanor asked. It was such a simple question, but no one had asked me that in years. What did I want to do? "I want to stop," I said. "I want to stop chasing people who are running away from me. I want to stop making excuses for bad behavior. I want to stop accepting treatment that I would never give to anyone else." "Then stop," Eleanor said simply. "What if they never speak to me again? What if they don't? Would that really be different from what you have now?" She was right, of course. The relationship I was fighting so hard to preserve barely existed anyway. I was clinging to the memory of closeness rather than the reality of distance. The next morning, I wrote another letter. This one was shorter. "Daniel, I want to congratulate you and Sophia on Isabella's birth. I hope she brings you tremendous joy. I also want you to know that I will no longer be available to provide free services or emergency assistance to your family. If you would like me to be part of your daughter's life, I am open to building a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection. If not, I understand and accept your choice. I wish you all the best. Love, Mom." I mailed it that afternoon before I could change my mind. Daniel's response came by phone this time, and he was angry. "Mom, what the hell is this letter supposed to mean? You're cutting off your own grandchild because we've been busy with a newborn." "I'm not cutting off anyone," I replied calmly. "I'm establishing boundaries." "Boundaries? You're being ridiculous. And selfish. This is about Isabella now, not about your hurt feelings." "You're absolutely right," I said. "This is about Isabella. It's about what kind of relationship she deserves to have with her grandmother. One based on convenience and exploitation, or one based on love and respect. Nobody's exploiting anyone. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was? Not because you needed something, not out of obligation, but because you actually cared about my life." The silence stretched so long I wondered if he had hung up. "That's different," he said finally. "Is it? When was the last time you included me in plans rather than asking me to solve problems? When was the last time you treated me like a valued member of the family rather than hired help?" Another pause. "I don't have time for this right now, Mom. We have a newborn." "I know. Congratulations again. I hope she grows up knowing she's surrounded by people who value each other." This time, I hung up first. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I kept expecting my phone to ring, kept hoping Daniel would reconsider and realize that I was asking for basic respect, not unreasonable demands. But the silence stretched on, broken only by Eleanor's daily check-ins and the familiar routines of work. I threw myself into my cooking with renewed focus, partly to distract myself from the pain but partly because I was rediscovering joy in the craft itself rather than just the service it provided to others. I began experimenting with recipes again, trying flavor combinations just because they interested me rather than because they met someone else's specifications. Mrs. Weatherby noticed the change immediately. "This soup is extraordinary, Gladys. What did you do differently?" I had added miso paste to the butternut squash base, a combination I had read about but never tried because none of my clients had asked for Asian fusion elements. "Just following my curiosity," I said. "It's delicious. You should consider writing a cookbook." The suggestion lodged in my mind like a seed. A cookbook. Recipes developed for my own pleasure rather than someone else's requirements. Stories about the dishes that had shaped my life, the meals that carried memories, the food that had been my language of love even when that love wasn't properly valued. That weekend, I started writing. Not recipes at first, just stories. The story of the apple pie that got me my first job with Mrs. Rothschild. The story of Daniel's favorite birthday cake and how I had learned to make it from scratch because store-bought frosting gave him a rash. The story of holiday cookies I still made every Christmas out of habit, even though no one came to eat them anymore. Writing felt like archaeology, uncovering layers of my own life that had been buried under decades of service to others. I had forgotten how much I loved the creative process of cooking, how satisfying it was to transform simple ingredients into something beautiful and nourishing. I had forgotten that I was more than just the sum of what I could provide for other people. Christmas approached with its familiar weight of expectation and disappointment. In previous years, I would have spent weeks preparing elaborate gift packages for Daniel and Sophia, cooking their favorite treats and choosing presents I couldn't afford but bought anyway because the giving felt like love. This year, I sent a simple card with a note, wishing you and Isabella a wonderful first Christmas together. Love, Mom. No gifts. No cookies. No elaborate gestures that would be accepted without acknowledgement or thanks. It felt strange and liberating at the same time. Christmas morning, I made breakfast for myself, French toast with real maple syrup and bacon cooked exactly the way I liked it. I had nowhere to be, no one to cook for, no obligations beyond my own simple pleasure. It was the first peaceful Christmas I had experienced in years. January brought unexpected news. Mrs. Morrison, one of my longtime clients, called to tell me she was moving to assisted living and would no longer need my services. I'm sorry, Gladys. I know this is short notice. Don't worry about me, Mrs. Morrison. I hope the transition goes smoothly for you. Actually, I wanted to ask you something. My granddaughter is getting married in the spring, and they're looking for someone to cater the reception. It would be a big job, 200 guests, very upscale. Would you be interested? 6 months ago, I would have said yes immediately, grateful for the work and the income. Now I found myself asking questions I had never asked before. What would be the expectations for my involvement? Would I be working with a wedding planner, or would I be responsible for coordinating all aspects of the meal service? Oh, I think they'd want you to handle everything food-related. Sarah, that's my granddaughter, she has very specific ideas about what she wants. And what would be the timeline for planning and preparation? As Mrs. Morrison described the elaborate menu Sarah had in mind and the compressed timeline for executing it, I recognized the familiar pattern: unrealistic expectations, inadequate planning time, maximum responsibility with minimal support. I'm flattered that you thought of me, I said finally. But I don't think this project is a good fit for my business. Oh, are you sure? The pay would be quite generous. I'm sure. But thank you for thinking of me. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen marveling at what had just happened. I had turned down work. Not because I couldn't do it, but because it would require me to accept treatment I was no longer willing to accept. Eleanor was delighted when I told her. You're learning to value your own time and energy, she said. That's the first step toward demanding that others value it too. But what if word gets around that I'm difficult to work with? Eleanor laughed. My dear, there's a difference between being difficult and having standards. You've spent decades being so accommodating that people forgot you were a person with needs and boundaries. It may take time for them to adjust to the new you. The new me. I liked the sound of that. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came a slowly growing sense of possibility. My cookbook project had evolved from random stories into a structured exploration of how food had shaped my immigrant experience in New York. I had connected with a small publisher who specialized in memoirs and was interested in seeing more chapters. This is compelling material, the editor told me during our phone conversation. The intersection of food, family, and finding your own voice, it's a story that needs to be told. For the first time in my adult life, I was creating something that existed purely for its own merit, not because someone else needed it from me. I was also sleeping better than I had in years. The constant anxiety of wondering when Daniel would call, whether I was doing enough to maintain our relationship, if I should reach out or wait for him to make contact, all of that had been replaced by a difficult but peaceful acceptance. I had done everything I could to bridge the gap between us. The next move, if there was to be one, would have to come from him. In May, almost 6 months after Isabella's birth, I received an unexpected visitor. Eleanor called one afternoon to ask if she could bring someone by for tea. A friend of mine is interested in meeting you, she explained. Someone who's heard about your cookbook project and has a proposal. The someone turned out to be Margaret Chen, a woman about my age who had recently opened a small culinary school in Brooklyn focused on teaching traditional cooking techniques to younger generations. Eleanor tells me you have 40 years of experience cooking for Manhattan's elite, Margaret said as we sat in my small living room, sharing tea and the lemon cookies I had made that morning. Something like that. I'm looking for instructors who can teach not just technique but also the history and cultural context of fine cooking. Would you be interested in teaching a class? Teaching. I had never considered myself qualified to teach anyone anything, despite decades of mastery in professional kitchens. I don't have any formal credentials, I said. Margaret smiled. You have something better than credentials. You have experience and stories. You know why techniques matter, not just how to execute them. The idea excited me more than I expected. Sharing knowledge rather than just providing service. Being valued for my expertise rather than just my availability. What would you want me to teach? I was thinking a class on classical sauce making. The foundation techniques that most young cooks learn incorrectly or not at all. But more than that, I want you to teach them why these techniques developed, what problems they solve, how they connect to the history of professional cooking. When Margaret left that afternoon, she had my tentative agreement to develop a curriculum for a 12-week course starting in the fall. That evening, I called Eleanor to thank her for the introduction. You looked happier today than I've seen you in months, Eleanor said. I felt happier. It's been so long since someone was interested in what I knew rather than what I could do for them. That's because you've been spending your time with people who saw you as a service provider rather than a whole person. You're finally remembering that you have value beyond your utility to others. The insight hit me like a revelation. For decades, I had defined my worth entirely through my ability to meet other people's needs. I was a good mother because I sacrificed for Daniel. I was a good cook because I satisfied my clients' requirements. I was a good person because I put everyone else first. But what happened when the people I served no longer needed or wanted my service? What happened when my son built a life that didn't include me? What happened when my identity as a caregiver was no longer required? I was finally finding out. And surprisingly, the answer wasn't emptiness or purposelessness. The answer was the discovery of parts of myself I had forgotten existed, the teacher, the writer, the woman who could create for her own joy rather than someone else's benefit. As summer unfolded, I found myself busier than I had been in years, but busy with projects I had chosen rather than obligations I had accepted. The cookbook was taking shape, the teaching curriculum was coming together, and for the first time in my adult life, I was making plans based on what interested me rather than what was needed from me. I was also, surprisingly, not as lonely as I had expected to be. The forced solitude of my separation from Daniel had taught me the difference between being alone and being lonely. I was alone much of the time now, but I was full of purpose and projects and the quiet satisfaction of finally living for myself. In early August, my phone rang with an unknown local number. Gladys? This is Jennifer Pembroke, Sophia's sister. I recognized the name from various family events where we had exchanged pleasantries but never really talked. Hello, Jennifer. How can I help you? I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Eleanor Hartwell. We serve on a museum committee together. I wanted to talk to you about something. This was unexpected. In my experience, the Pembroke family communicated with me only through official channels and only when they needed something specific. Is everything all right? Well, that's complicated. Can I be frank with you? Please. I think Daniel and Sophia are making a mistake by shutting you out of Isabella's life. And I think you have a right to know that not everyone in the family agrees with how they've handled things. My heart began to race. After months of silence, here was acknowledgement that my concerns might be legitimate. I appreciate you saying that. Look, I know my sister can be particular about how she wants things done. And I know Daniel seems to think that success means leaving the past behind. But Isabella deserves to know her grandmother, and you deserve to know your granddaughter. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for some direct conversation. I'm having a small family gathering next weekend, just a barbecue at my house in Westchester. Daniel and Sophia will be there with Isabella. Would you like to come? The invitation was both exactly what I had hoped for and exactly what I had learned to be wary of. A chance to see Isabella, to be included in family events, to possibly begin rebuilding relationships that had seemed irreparable. But also a potential setup for more disappointment, more evidence that I was welcome only when someone else advocated for my inclusion. Can I ask you something, Jennifer? Of course. Do Daniel and Sophia know you're inviting me? A pause. Not yet. I thought it would be better to ask you first, then handle any objections they might have. Handle their objections. As if my presence were a problem to be managed rather than a gift to be welcomed. I appreciate the thought, I said carefully. But I don't want to be anyone's surprise guest, and I don't want you to have to convince them that including me is acceptable. So you're saying no? I'm saying that if Daniel and Sophia want me to be part of Isabella's life, they know how to reach me. I'm not going to sneak in the back door of my own family. After I hung up, I felt shaky but proud. 6 months ago, I would have jumped at any chance to see Isabella, regardless of the circumstances. I would have been grateful to be included, even reluctantly. I would have accepted being treated as an afterthought as long as it meant access to my granddaughter. But I had learned something important during these months of solitude. I deserved better than that. Isabella deserved better than that. She deserved a grandmother who was valued and respected, not one who accepted scraps of attention and called it love. 2 days later, Daniel called. Mom? Jennifer said she invited you to the barbecue. She did. And you said no? I did. Why? His voice sounded genuinely puzzled, as if he couldn't imagine why anyone would turn down time with family. Because I don't want to come as your aunt's guest to meet my own granddaughter. If you want me there, Daniel, then invite me yourself. Mom, you're being ridiculous. What's the difference who invites you? The difference is respect. The difference is acknowledgement that I'm Isabella's grandmother by right, not by someone else's charity. Another long silence. Fine, he said finally. Do you want to come to Jennifer's barbecue? The words were right, but the tone was all wrong, grudging, irritated, as if he were checking an unpleasant task off a list. Not like that, I said quietly. When you want your mother and your daughter to meet because it matters to you, call me again. I hung up before he could respond. That night, I wrote in my journal, another new habit I had developed during these months of self-discovery. Today I chose dignity over access. I chose self-respect over the illusion of family connection. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, and also one of the most important. Eleanor found me crying when she stopped by the next afternoon. Second thoughts, she asked gently. No, I said, wiping my eyes. Grief. I'm grieving the relationship I always hoped Daniel and I would have. I'm grieving the grandmother experience I dreamed of. I'm letting go of fantasies that were probably never realistic in the first place. That's healthy, Eleanor said. You can't build something real on top of fantasies and false hopes. As autumn approached, my life had settled into new rhythms that felt surprisingly fulfilling. My cookbook manuscript was nearly complete. My teaching job at Margaret's culinary school was scheduled to begin in September. I had started taking watercolor classes on Saturday mornings, returning to the art I had abandoned decades ago. Most surprisingly, I had made friends. Real friends, not just the polite acquaintance relationships I maintained with clients. Margaret had introduced me to other women in the culinary world, some immigrants like myself, others who had simply found their way to food as a second or third career. We met monthly for potluck dinners where we shared dishes that told stories about our cultures, our families, our journeys to this point in our lives. You seem different, one of them observed one evening. More present, somehow. I feel more present, I replied. For a long time, I was living in the future, waiting for other people to give me permission to be happy. Now I'm trying to find happiness in what actually exists rather than what might someday exist. It was liberating and terrifying in equal measure. In early October, I received a letter in the mail. Not an email, but an actual handwritten letter on expensive stationery that I recognized immediately. It was from Sophia. Dear Gladys, it began, I hope this letter finds you well. I want to apologize for how distant we've been since Isabella was born. The truth is, becoming a mother has been overwhelming in ways I didn't expect, and I think I handled the transition poorly. I set the letter down and took a deep breath before continuing. Daniel has told me about your conversations over the past few months, and I want you to know that I don't disagree with your concerns. Isabella deserves to know her grandmother, and you deserve to be treated as an important part of her life, not as an afterthought. My hands were shaking as I read those words. After months of being told I was being dramatic or unreasonable, here was acknowledgement that my feelings had been valid all along. I know this may sound strange, but I was hoping we could start over. Not pretend that the past few months didn't happen, but try to build something better going forward. Would you be willing to meet for lunch, just the two of us, to talk about how we might make that possible? The letter was signed, with respect and hope, Sophia. I read it 3 times before calling Eleanor. What do you think it means? I asked her. I think it means that someone has finally recognized you as a person whose feelings matter, Eleanor replied. The question is, what do you want it to mean? That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want from this potential reconciliation? I spent the weekend thinking about it, walking through Central Park and sitting by the reservoir where I had spent so many hours over the past year sorting through my feelings about family and independence and self-worth. Monday morning, I called Sophia. I got your letter, I said when she answered. I'm glad. I wasn't sure you would want to hear from me. I did, and I do. Thank you for reaching out. So you'll meet with me? Yes, but I have some conditions. Of course. I want to meet somewhere neutral, not at your home or office. I want this to be a conversation between equals, not a supplicant asking for favors from someone in power. That sounds fair. And I want us to be honest with each other, even if it's uncomfortable. I'm too old to waste time on polite pretending. Sophia laughed, and for the first time since I'd known her, it sounded genuine rather than socially appropriate. I think I can handle that. We met the following Thursday at a small cafe in Greenwich Village, the kind of place where conversations could unfold slowly over multiple cups of coffee without pressure from demanding waitstaff. Sophia looked tired in a way that expensive makeup couldn't completely hide. Motherhood, I realized, had changed her just as profoundly as Daniel's birth had changed me 38 years earlier. "Thank you for coming," she said as we settled into a corner booth. "Thank you for asking." For a few minutes, we made awkward small talk about the weather and the neighborhood, both of us gathering courage for the more difficult conversation. Finally, Sophia looked directly at me and said, "I owe you an apology." "Several apologies, actually." I waited. "I've been thinking a lot since Isabella was born about what kind of mother I want to be and what kind of family I want her to grow up in. And I realized that I've been so concerned with controlling everything that I've shut out people who should be central to her life. Including me. Including you. And I think I know why I did that, but it's not a very flattering reason." She paused to sip her coffee, gathering her thoughts. "The truth is, I was intimidated by you. By your relationship with Daniel, by how much you sacrificed for him, by the fact that you know him in ways I never will. I felt like having you around would remind everyone, including Daniel, that I had married into his life, but his real family bond was with you." This was not the conversation I had expected, but it was perhaps the conversation we needed. "Sophia, I never wanted to compete with you for Daniel's affection. I just wanted to remain part of his life. I know that now. But when I was pregnant, and then when Isabella was born, I was so focused on proving that I could handle everything myself that I pushed away anyone who might have been able to help. Including people who wanted to help out of love rather than obligation." We talked for 2 hours that afternoon, sharing stories about Daniel that revealed different facets of the man we both loved. Sophia told me about the way he still made the same face when concentrating that he had made as a child. I told her about the bedtime stories he used to insist I retell exactly the same way every night. "He talks about you more than you probably realize," she said as we were preparing to leave. "He just doesn't know how to bridge the gap that's developed between you. I think he's afraid you won't forgive him." "There's nothing to forgive," I said. "But there are things that need to change." "Like what?" "Like being treated as a valued family member rather than free help. Like being included in decisions about Isabella rather than being informed after the fact. Like having my time and feelings respected rather than assumed." Sophia nodded. "Those seem like reasonable expectations." "They do to me too." As we stood to leave, Sophia hesitated. "Would you like to meet Isabella? I could bring her by your apartment, or you could come to ours, whatever would be more comfortable for you." My heart jumped, but I forced myself to consider the offer carefully. "I would love to meet her," I said. "But I want you to talk to Daniel first. I want him to be part of this decision, not just someone who finds out about it later." "Are you sure?" "I could just bring her by." "I'm sure. Isabella deserves to grow up in a family where the adults communicate with each other and make decisions together. Let's start modeling that now." 3 days later, Daniel called. "Mom? Sophia said you two had a good conversation." "We did. She also said you want me to be involved in planning for you to meet Isabella." "I do." "Why?" The question was genuine, not confrontational. "Because you're her father, and you're my son. Because I want us to make decisions together rather than work around each other. Because Isabella deserves to see her parents and grandmother treating each other with respect." Another pause. "I'm scared," Daniel said finally, and his voice sounded younger than it had in years. "Of what?" "Of letting you down again. Of not knowing how to be your son and Isabella's father at the same time. Of screwing this up the way I've screwed up everything else with you." My throat tightened with emotion. This was the vulnerability I had hoped for, the acknowledgement that our relationship mattered to him too. "Daniel, you haven't screwed everything up. You've become a successful, accomplished man who's starting his own family. Those were always my dreams for you. But I've hurt you." "I know I have." "Yes, you have. But hurt can heal if we're both willing to work on it." We talked for another hour, the longest conversation we'd had in years. We made plans for me to visit the following weekend, not for a rushed meeting squeezed between other obligations, but for a real visit with time to talk and connect and begin building something new. When I hung up, I realized I was crying. But this time, they were tears of relief rather than grief. The visit went better than I had dared to hope. Isabella was beautiful, 8 months old with Daniel's dark eyes and Sophia's delicate features. She was curious and alert, studying my face with the intense concentration babies bring to new experiences. "She likes you," Sophia said as Isabella reached for my glasses with grabby fingers. "How can you tell?" "She's not crying. She usually cries with new people." I held my granddaughter for the first time that afternoon, feeling the perfect weight of her in my arms and breathing in the sweet baby scent that brought back floods of memories from Daniel's infancy. But this was different from those memories, not weighted with worry about the future or anxiety about doing everything right. This was pure joy, uncomplicated by anything except the simple pleasure of connection. "She has your chin," I told Daniel as Isabella dozed in my arms. "You think so?" "Definitely. You had that same determined little chin when you slept." Daniel smiled, the first completely unguarded smile I had seen from him in years. "I was really afraid she wouldn't know you," he admitted. "That too much time had passed." "Babies don't hold grudges," I said. "They just want to be loved." "Is that a hint?" he asked, but he was still smiling. "If you want to take it as one." Before I left that evening, we made plans, real plans, with specific dates and times. I would babysit Isabella one afternoon while Daniel and Sophia went to a movie. We would have dinner the following Sunday, at my apartment this time so they could see where I lived and how I spent my time. Isabella would have her first Halloween costume, something we would choose together. Small steps, but they felt enormous after months of distance. As autumn deepened into winter, our new family rhythm began to solidify. I saw Isabella once a week, sometimes more. I cooked Sunday dinners for Daniel and Sophia, introducing them to recipes I had developed over the years but never had the right audience to share with. We celebrated Isabella's first Halloween, her first Thanksgiving, the approach of her first Christmas. More importantly, we began to talk to each other as adults who valued each other's perspectives. Daniel asked for my advice about balancing work and fatherhood. Sophia shared her concerns about postpartum depression and accepted my suggestions about local support groups. I told them about my cookbook project and my teaching job, watching their surprise as they realized I had a life and ambitions beyond their needs. "You seem different, Mom," Daniel said one Sunday as we cleaned up after dinner. "More? I don't know. More yourself." "I feel more myself," I replied. Spending time away from relationships that weren't working taught me who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else needs. "And who are you?" I considered the question seriously. "I'm a woman who loves cooking and teaching. I'm a grandmother who wants to share stories and traditions with her granddaughter. I'm a mother who hopes her son is proud of her, but who doesn't need his approval to value herself." Daniel was quiet for a moment, loading the dishwasher with careful attention to the silverware arrangement. "I am proud of you," he said finally. "I always have been. I just didn't know how to say it without feeling like I was admitting I still needed you." Daniel, successful adults are allowed to still need their mothers sometimes. Independence doesn't mean isolation. I wish I had figured that out sooner. You figured it out when you were ready. That's what matters. Christmas that year was the first holiday in decades that felt genuinely celebratory rather than obligatory. We spent Christmas Eve at Daniel and Sophia's apartment, where I cooked traditional dishes I had been making for 40 years but which they had never experienced. Isabella, now 10 months old and crawling with determined enthusiasm, provided entertainment by trying to eat wrapping paper and knocking over carefully arranged presents. "Next year she'll actually understand what's happening," Sophia said as we watched Isabella investigate an empty box with more interest than the expensive toy it had contained. "Next year," I agreed, and for the first time in years, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than something to worry about. As I rode the subway home that night, carrying leftover cookies and a photo Sophia had printed of the 3 generations of women, herself, me, and Isabella, I reflected on the year that had transformed my understanding of love and family. I had learned that love without boundaries quickly becomes exploitation. I had learned that people can only meet your expectations if you clearly communicate what those expectations are. I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept poor treatment, because accepting it enables the other person to continue behaving badly. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth as a person existed independently of my usefulness to others. I was valuable because I was a whole human being with experiences and wisdom and creativity to offer the world, not just because I could solve problems or provide services for my family. My relationship with Daniel and Sophia was far from perfect. We still had occasional misunderstandings, moments when old patterns of behavior threatened to reassert themselves. But we had built a foundation of mutual respect that made those moments manageable rather than devastating. And Isabella was growing up in a family where the adults treated each other with kindness, where disagreements were resolved through conversation rather than silent punishment, where love was expressed through time and attention rather than just obligation and duty. On New Year's Eve, as I sat in my small Queens apartment working on the final chapter of my cookbook, I thought about the woman I had been exactly 1 year earlier, anxious, depleted, begging for scraps of affection from people who had learned to take my love for granted. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the best gift you can give to people you love is a healthy, whole version of yourself. Someone who had learned that boundaries aren't walls that keep love out, they're foundations that make genuine love possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Happy New Year, Mom. Thank you for teaching me that love means showing up, not just saying the words. See you Sunday for dinner." I smiled and typed back, "Happy New Year, sweetheart. See you Sunday." Then I returned to my writing, documenting the recipes and stories that had shaped my life, preserving them not just for Isabella but for anyone who might need to remember that food is love made visible, that families are built through daily choices to value each other, and that it's never too late to reclaim your own worth. Outside my window, the city sparkled with possibility. Somewhere across town, my granddaughter was sleeping safely in her crib, surrounded by parents who had learned to love each other and themselves more fully. Tomorrow I would teach young cooks the foundations of sauce making, sharing knowledge that connected technique to history to the deeper art of nourishing people well. It was a small life, perhaps, but it was fully mine. And that, I had finally learned, was enough. The months that followed brought their own small miracles and daily satisfactions. My cookbook was accepted for publication, with a release date planned for the following fall. My cooking classes at Margaret's Culinary School had a waiting list, filled with young chefs who were hungry not just for technical knowledge but for the stories and cultural context I could provide. Isabella took her first steps in my apartment on a sunny March afternoon, tottering between the couch and my outstretched arms while Daniel and Sophia cheered from the kitchen doorway. Later that evening, as we celebrated this milestone with champagne for the adults and apple juice for Isabella, Daniel raised his glass in a toast. "To Mom," he said, "who taught me that the best families are the ones that choose each other every day, not just the ones that take each other for granted." As I looked around my small living room, at my son and daughter-in-law, at my granddaughter who was examining her own feet with scientific interest, at the photos and artwork and books that reflected the life I had finally learned to claim for myself, I felt the deep satisfaction of a story that had found its way to the right ending. Not a perfect ending, because real life doesn't provide those. But a true ending, one that honored the complexity of family love while insisting on the dignity and worth of every person involved. I had learned to cook for 30 rich families over the course of my career. But the most important cooking I had ever done was in my own kitchen, serving meals to people who loved me not for what I could provide but for who I was. That, I realized, had been the real recipe all along, not for perfect dishes, but for a life seasoned with respect, garnished with joy, and shared with people who understood that the greatest luxury isn't what money can buy, but the simple abundance of being truly known and cherished. The son who once walked past me in that grand lobby now calls me every Tuesday just to hear about my week. The granddaughter I feared I might never know is learning to say "Nana" and associates my voice with stories and songs and the smell of fresh cookies cooling on the rack. And I am learning, finally, that love returned is wonderful, but love given from a place of wholeness and self-respect is a gift to everyone involved, even when, especially when, it comes with boundaries that insist on basic human dignity. If my story touches you, if you see yourself in the woman who gave too much for too long, or in the family member who forgot to value what they had always taken for granted, I want you to know that change is possible at any stage of life. It's never too late to claim your worth. It's never too late to insist on respect. It's never too late to discover who you might become when you stop trying so hard to be what everyone else needs. Have you lived something like this, or known someone who has? Please share your story in the comments below. Like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe if you believe these conversations matter. Your support helps me continue opening my heart and sharing these truths that too often go unspoken but desperately need to be heard. Because at the end of the day, we all deserve to be more than just useful. We all deserve to be loved for the whole, complicated, beautiful people we are. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing me as more than just the meals I can prepare or the problems I can solve. Thank you for remembering that every person has a story worth telling, a life worth living, and a heart that deserves to be cherished, not just used.